My name's Tyler, and I'm a sophomore at a small college here in Denver. It's a decent school, but like most college students, I spend a lot of time online, between classes, study sessions, and just killing time. That's how I ended up on Kik, a messaging app. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a way to pass time and maybe meet some new people. That's when I started chatting with Hannah. She popped up in one of those public groups I was in, and before long, we were messaging privately. She seemed cool, funny, flirty, and she sent a few pictures. Nothing too wild, just normal selfies. She said she was a freshman at a nearby university, and we started talking about meeting up. For weeks, we chatted almost every day, and it felt like we were actually building a connection. I couldn't believe my luck. Here was this cute girl who seemed really into me. Then, one night, she suggested we finally meet in person. I was nervous but excited. She told me to meet her at a park nearby, a quiet spot not too far from campus. It was late, around 10 p.m., but I didn't think much of it. College kids do weird stuff all the time, right? So, I got ready and headed out. The park was mostly empty when I got there, just a couple of people walking their dogs. I looked around for Hannah, but I didn't see her anywhere. I figured maybe she was running late. I shot her a message, telling her I'd arrived, and waited. That's when I noticed the black SUV parked across the street. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now something about it made me uneasy. The windows were tinted, and the engine was still running. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but then the door opened, and two men stepped out. At first, they didn't seem to be heading toward me, just kind of moving casually, but then I realized they weren't going anywhere else. They were coming straight for me. Panic hit me hard and fast. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, that maybe they were just walking through the park, but the way they were looking at me, no, this wasn't normal. My heart was racing, and before I could even think, one of them grabbed my arm. I yanked it back instinctively and started to run. I didn't know where I was going, just anywhere away from them. I could hear their footsteps pounding behind me, getting closer, and the adrenaline kicked in. My legs were on autopilot, sprinting as fast as I could through the park. Somehow, I managed to reach the other side of the park where a couple of joggers were. I shouted for help, breathless, and they stopped, looking alarmed. The two men chasing me must have realized they couldn't grab me without drawing attention. So they turned back toward the SUV. I watched as they jumped in and sped off down the street. I was shaking all over, trying to catch my breath, and it hit me. I had just narrowly escaped something terrible. I don't know what those men wanted, but I had a sickening feeling it wasn't anything good. After they were gone, the joggers asked if I was okay, and one of them called the police for me. When the cops arrived, I told them everything that had happened. I even mentioned Hannah and Kik, thinking that maybe she could help identify who these guys were. But when I got back to my phone to show them the messages, Hannah's profile was gone. Just like that. All of our conversations, her photos, everything had disappeared like it never existed. The cops took my statement, but without any solid leads, there wasn't much they could do. I felt helpless, like I had fallen for some kind of elaborate trap, and there was no one to blame. Hannah wasn't real, she never had been. Whoever I had been talking to, they had set me up. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the fear. Every time I went out, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if that black SUV would show up again. I couldn't stop replaying that night in my head, thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't managed to run, if those joggers hadn't been nearby. I had come so close to being taken, and no one would have known where I went. I would have just disappeared. I stopped using Kik after that, deleted the app from my phone, and tried to put it behind me. But no matter how hard I try, I can't forget it. There's always that little voice in the back of my head, reminding me how close I came to something horrific. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I do know one thing. I was lucky to get away. And now, I'm never meeting anyone from the internet again. My name is Mayan, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I've always been a little too curious for my own good, especially when it comes to the internet. You know how it is getting bored with the usual stuff and looking for something new to pass the time. That's how I ended up on Kik. I was bored one evening, scrolling through random chat groups when I came across something strange. An invite to a group called Night Watchers. The name alone piqued my interest, but what really hooked me were the messages inside. They were cryptic, like something out of a horror movie. People talked about taking control of fate and escaping the mundane. It sounded like some sort of cult, but I thought it was just an edgy role-playing game or something. I figured, what's the harm in checking it out? I was wrong. I started chatting with a user named Redrider. At first, it was just casual conversation, but he quickly shifted gears. He told me he could help me break free from the boring routines of life. Said he could show me how to take control if I followed his instructions. It was intriguing, but also kind of unsettling. Yet, for some reason, I kept talking to him. The tasks started out harmless enough. He'd asked me to send him photos of random places around the city, things like a coffee shop, an old theater, or a bridge. It felt like a scavenger hunt, and I didn't think much of it. But then, things started getting darker. He began asking me to take photos of more secluded spots, like empty parking lots and alleyways at night. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Why did he want these pictures? What was the point? But every time I questioned it, Redrider would spin it like it was all part of some bigger plan to help me break free. He said I just needed to trust him, and for a while, I stupidly went along with it. Then one night, he asked me to meet him. Not in a public place, but in a dark alleyway behind an abandoned warehouse. That was the moment it clicked for me. This wasn't a game. This was something dangerous. I told him no, said I wasn't interested anymore, and blocked him on Kik. The next day, I tried to go about my life as usual, but I couldn't shake this creeping sense of unease. I kept thinking about how he had asked me to take photos of those secluded spots, and now he knew exactly where I'd been. Later that afternoon, when I went out to my car, I noticed something off right away. There was a note tucked under my windshield wiper. My heart dropped. I almost didn't want to read it, but I forced myself to. It was short, just 4 words. You can't block fate. I felt sick to my stomach. He had found me. I stood there, frozen, looking around the parking lot, but there was no one in sight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the note. I raced back inside and locked all the doors. I didn't know what to do. Do I go to the police? But what would I tell them? That I'd been talking to some creepy guy online, and now he was stalking me. I felt stupid. I'd brought this on myself by playing around with that group. I deleted Kik right away, but it didn't make me feel any safer. Every time I left my apartment, I felt like someone was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every little sound. I barely slept that night, and the next morning, I made up my mind. I had to get out of there. I packed my bags and moved out of state the following week. It was a drastic decision, but I couldn't stay in Cleveland knowing that he might be out there watching me. I didn't tell anyone the real reason why I left. I didn't want them to think I was paranoid, but deep down, I was terrified. Even now, months later, I still feel like I'm being watched. I haven't touched Kik since, but I know that group is still out there, lurking in the shadows of the internet. And I can't help but wonder if Redrider is still looking for me, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. Sometimes, I think about that last message, you can't block fate. It haunts me, those words echoing in the back of my mind. I moved, I changed my life, but no matter how far I run, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that he's still out there, waiting, watching. And maybe one day, fate will catch up with me. I was just a broke college student at the University of Illinois in Chicago, struggling to make it through another semester. My apartment was a dump shared with 3 other guys, and I was barely scraping by on instant noodles and cheap coffee. My part-time job at a grocery store wasn't cutting it, and I needed more money, fast. One night, while lying on my bed, I received a message on Kik from someone with the username Golden Ticket. The message read, "I have a business opportunity for you. Easy money, no questions asked." It seemed strange, but the offer of $500 was too tempting to ignore. I was desperate, and desperation can make you do things you wouldn't normally consider. I replied, and Golden Ticket responded immediately, almost as if he'd been waiting. "All you have to do is pick up a package from an address on the south side and drop it off at a warehouse near the river. Do that, and the money's yours." The south side of Chicago wasn't the safest area, and the idea of going there made me uneasy. But the thought of easy cash overshadowed my better judgment. When I asked what was in the package, Golden Ticket dodged the question. "Don't worry about it. You're just the delivery guy." Despite my unease, I agreed. I convinced myself it couldn't be anything too serious, maybe just documents or something harmless. The next day, I made my way to the address, an old, run-down building in a rough part of town. The streets were nearly empty, and the few people I saw didn't make eye contact. The whole place had an eerie feel, like something out of a bad movie. When I knocked on the door, a man appeared. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't say a word, just handed me a small, tightly wrapped package and shut the door. The package felt heavier than it looked, and my anxiety spiked, but I was too far in to back out. I hopped on the bus and headed to the warehouse by the river. It was in an industrial area, far from the public eye. The building was huge and mostly deserted, with broken windows and weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement. The air was thick with a damp, musty smell that made my stomach churn. I found the door I was supposed to use, and after a deep breath, I knocked. A man opened the door, a hulking figure who looked rough around the edges. He snatched the package from my hands and looked me over, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're done here," he said gruffly before slamming the door shut. I quickly texted Golden Ticket to let him know I'd completed the job. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. $500 had been deposited into my account. I felt a rush of relief. It was over, and I had the money. Maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all, I thought. But that feeling didn't last long. 3 days later, I was in my apartment, trying to study, when I heard a loud knock at the door. I opened it to find the police standing there, guns drawn, shouting at me to get on the ground. My roommates were just as shocked as I was. They handcuffed me and started tearing apart my room, searching through everything. Finally, one of the officers told me why they were there. The package I delivered was filled with narcotics, high-grade stuff. I was being arrested for drug trafficking. My heart sank. I tried to explain that I didn't know what was in the package, that I was just doing a favor for someone on Kik, but they didn't care. When I checked, the profile for Golden Ticket had vanished, leaving me with no proof that he ever existed. As they dragged me out of my apartment, all I could think about was how easily my life had been ruined. I was just trying to make a little money, but now I was facing years in prison for a crime I barely understood. I trusted a stranger online, and it had cost me everything. The cops weren't interested in my story. To them, I was just another stupid kid who got caught up in something way over his head. I sat in the back of the squad car, staring at my reflection in the glass, wondering how I could have been so naive. My life was over, and there was nothing I could do to change it.